Kia ora, you're listening to Crossing Currents, Aotearoa New Zealand Artists in Venice, a podcast series by Contemporary Hum produced with the support of Creative New Zealand. In this series, we'll be interviewing the Aotearoa artists presenting at the 60th Venice Biennale and its parallel events. I'm Elena Kafka, Managing Director of Contemporary Hum, and today I speak with artist Caitlin Devoy about her presentation Body Objects. Body Objects is featured in the 2024 edition of Personal Structures, a biennial contemporary art exhibition organised by the European Cultural Centre, or ECC, that runs parallel to the Venice Biennale. Hosted in two beautiful Venetian buildings, Personal Structures is an opportunity for 200 artists from 51 countries to exhibit their work in Venice and forge new professional connections, something that has attracted several artists from Aotearoa in previous years. However, as an exhibition opportunity, Personal Structures is very different to official Biennale events or other curated exhibitions. It isn't strictly a curated event, rather, invited artists have to pay to support their own participation. This results in a range in the quality of works on display and what are often quite incongruous selections of work. 3 Aotearoa artists are presenting work in this year's edition, and I was very happy to speak with Caitlin Devoy at Personal Structures. Caitlin Devoy is a contemporary Aotearoa New Zealand artist. Born in London, she grew up in Omaroro, Newtown, Whanganui-a-Tara, Wellington, where she lives and works. Her work engages humour as a historical strategy of disruption and combines it with the erotic and explosive politics of the body. Caitlin's sculptures employ the tactile, seductive, and kinesthetic potency of materials, harnessing their potential to engage the viewer in an embodied, rather than predominantly visual, experience. We spoke on-site at Palazzo Mora during the opening week of the Venice Biennale in April 2024. Congratulations on your involvement in the show. I wondered if we could start with you talking about how you came to present in Personal Structures, what that process was like, and how you found it.
Sure. So I received this really nice email one morning inviting me to be part of this show, and there was a really lovely response to my work in the email. And so I was really excited about the idea of showing in Venice. I've been to Venice a couple of times in the past, and I saw Lisa Reihana's work here in the Biennale. So I was familiar with how beautiful and how intense Venice is and how full of people who are interested in art it is. So I was really excited by the prospect of being able to show here in Venice. And then I spoke to other artists who I had heard of who'd shown here. Then I had to apply for funding because it's not cheap. And I started working on a proposal to Creative New Zealand to be able to have this opportunity to show here. And I'd really love to thank Creative New Zealand for their funding, which I'm really, really grateful for. And also thank Heather Galbraith, Chelsea Nichols, Jill Gatfield and Alice Tappenden for their advice and support, because it does take a lot of support and that sort of thing to be able to do this show.
Yeah, it does take a village. So the works, I wonder whether you could describe the work, what they're made of and where they're located?
Sure. So there are 2 cast silicon sculptures in display cases and a video work. The first one of the sculptures is called Cannons, and it features a pair of cast silicon objects, which are sort of a hybrid between switches, alarms or breasts, and they're poking out of an acrylic display case with the sort of toggle switch nipple components exposed. And then there's another sculpture called Basso Fermata, which is a cast silicon version of a Yamaha bass recorder, and that's in a freestanding display case. So the body of the recorder snakes around inside the display case, protected, but the mouthpiece protrudes and dangles down out of a hole in the display case. It's a little bit like a glory hole. And then the third work is a video work called Body Objects, which was filmed in my house in Newtown. And I'd like to thank Fraser Walker for his amazing videography and music. So the video work that we filmed features multiples of the silicon objects, and then there's silicon goo, which sort of comes alive, slithering over the objects, and there's also a performance component from me in the video where I dance wearing one of the objects.
As you say, the works transform these everyday objects. So the recorder and the light switches, and they're transformed in quite unexpected ways, which subvert how we would anticipate to interact with these objects normally. What expectations or assumptions are you aiming to subvert with your work, and what is the role of humour in that?
I think I have a similar impulse to comedians and other feminist artists, and it's this impulse towards irreverence, where I want to poke fun at and also critique some of the affectations and inequities in high art. And the work, I'm also kind of trying to subvert the expectation that when the viewer's in the space, they are neutral and passive and invisible. An artist that I really like, Mauricio Catalan, he describes laughter as a Trojan horse. And it really is, it's like a stealth approach to revealing serious concerns without being boring and didactic about it. There's a really rich history of feminist and queer artists using humour as a form of rebellion against male power structures. Because humour is sort of like the honey and the bee sting combined. I think that's why I'm drawn to it. The reason why I've used those everyday objects, like recorders, switches, and also in other work, boxing bags and cream canisters, is that people have a familiarity with those objects, and it's a familiarity that's visual and tactile. So you recognise them when you see them, but you also have this embodied cognition where when you're looking at them, you also know how it would feel to touch and toggle the switch or to put the mouthpiece to your lips. And then because I have played around with the materiality of the objects, they're not made in the usual materials they would be in the real world. They are made out of silicon and resin. And the silicon in particular has this these qualities that make it body-like, the droop, the tactility, and then also the colour of the objects that I've made. And that gives them this body sort of feel and look. So when you're in the room with the works, you're having this funny experience of reading them as the objects and also as body parts. And then, maybe this kind of recognition of touching them, and there's a sexual kind of suggestiveness to them, which works a little bit like metaphor in poetry, where you're likening things to other things, and it opens up different ways of experiencing them, I guess.
Totally. This uncanny kind of status between body and object is really palpable. So much so that I think people have quite visceral responses to the works as well. Yeah. I wondered whether you could maybe speak to the range of responses that people have to these works and what kind of responses you are aiming to provoke.
I guess this is related to the previous question a bit more, but with the works, I'm sort of placing the visual and the tactile on an equal footing and sort of undermining the binary hierarchy between mind and body by doing that. This sort of Cartesian hierarchy where vision is associated with logic and understanding and masculinity, and touch is associated with the body and sensuality and emotion and perversity and also femininity. So I want to challenge those binaries because they encode power.
And people can touch the works, right? It's encouraged that people interact with them actually hands-on, or to a degree.
Well, the works, I've made them in a way that it's really, there's a provocation there in the way that they're displayed. Because usually your display case is about protecting the artwork and keeping it away from people's grubby fingers, and it's in this sort of hallowed sphere of the vitrine or the display case. And the objects that I've made intentionally stick out into the space of the viewer, and because of the material they're made from, if you move around in the space, that recorder sort of starts to jiggle a little bit, and it's just, in previous shows where I've shown silicon objects, people just absolutely can't resist touching them. They look around and check to see that there's no security guard watching them, ready to tell them off, and then they want to touch them to kind of to figure out what they feel like, and but also because it's a little bit naughty and a little bit cheeky.
It's some sort of desirability of the material, like you can't resist, but you know you shouldn't because it's an artwork, and also it kind of looks like a sex toy, or it looks like something you shouldn't be touching in public.
Yeah.
So that's a really interesting combination.
And like the Canon's work with the giant switches, which also sort of look like breasts, the toggle switches are sticking right out of the display case. And, you know, if you read those as toggle switches, you know that you're meant to like flick them on and off. And then you can see that they have this rubberiness to them, and it's just, you just want to know how they're going to bounce or jiggle around.
Totally.
Yeah,
totally. And on the topic of material, I wondered whether you'd be able to speak about the process of creating your sculptures.
So my process involves digital modelling and stereolithographic 3D printing, alongside mould making and casting processes which have a 7,000-year-old history. So there's that combination of the really, really contemporary and really ancient in my making process. And I cast multiples of the objects in a prosthetic grade silicon, which is a material that's more commonly used to produce sex toys, medical devices and prosthetics than it is to create art objects. And all of those types of objects like sex toys have this association with the body. Silicon behaves in a really bodily way because it droops, it flexes, it jiggles. I find silicon a really subjective and responsive material. It flows and it moves like a body in motion. And I really enjoy the unruliness and sensual qualities of the silicon. That's partly why I wanted to make that video work, Body Objects, because it allows the viewer this insight into my experience in playing with and working with silicon when it's in its liquid state, and the gooey silicon in the video becomes this kind of animated, sensual kind of entity that has its own energy, and you see these climactic ripples of goo flowing over the objects, and that's really what it's like when I'm casting those recorders and other objects. I really enjoy it when it's in this luscious kind of shiny liquid state. I find it really beautiful, but I know that some people find it quite gross and sticky and disgusting. But I find it really appealing.
It's really interesting to hear you talk about the video as representing a part of the sculptures that the sculptures themselves actually can't represent, because they've been cast, so they're no longer in that flow state.
Yeah.
So in terms of dance, how does that factor into maybe a relationship with the materials? Or you say you have a background in dance as well. How do you see that in relation to the works?
I did classical ballet for 13 years long ago, and I do actually still continue to dance, but not classical ballet anymore. And I think that dance background feeds and has always fed into the way that I approach sculpture. When I was doing my master's, I realised that my way of looking at sculptures might not be the way that everybody looks at them, because I've always seen the objects, whether they're figurative or completely abstract, as sort of stilled moments in a dance or in a movement. They're like these moments that are kind of frozen in time, like Medusa has turned them to stone. But then I, because of my dance background, have this impulse to unstill them in a way. And that's something that the video allowed me to do, but also that's probably part of the reason why those silicon objects, they have that capacity to be kinetic and move and be wiggled and jiggled around by somebody in the space.
On the topic of sculpture, because we are in Venice, we're in one of the centres of the Italian Renaissance, we were talking about the image of David and how this beautiful piece of Renaissance sculpture has become commodified into kitsch souvenirs, and, you know, he's on aprons and underwear and things like this. Do you see a relationship between your work and Michelangelo's David or Renaissance sculpture?
Yeah, I do actually. Funnily enough, there's this mixture of the reverence that I have for the virtuosity of works like that and the sensual quality of the marble. But then that appreciation exists alongside my impulse to subvert the gravitas and the power of this heroic male nude. And by association, the maleness of sculpture and this sort of tendency to glorify and equate the masculine with solidity and visibility and social power. So in a way, it's my sense of humour to see what it's like if you reduce this heroic male nude all the way back to this just the phallic kind of member dangling out of the display case.
I wondered whether you could talk about the kinds of responses that they provoke in viewers and how these responses differ.
Yeah, they definitely do provoke quite differing responses. Some people are really drawn to the objects and find them hilarious. They immediately start laughing and they want to kind of touch the objects and play around with them. And then other people feel quite embarrassed and uncomfortable around the objects, like the sexual suggestiveness of the objects. It's almost as though when you're in the space, you're comparing yourself to the objects, which as a woman is something that you're so used to being kind of looked at and in contexts that are not sexual, perhaps being sexualized. And then I think that sometimes men, when they go into this space and there's this big, thick, flaccid recorder dangling in front of them, it's kind of an uncomfortable experience. And I really enjoy that it's their turn to kind of feel exposed in that space of the gallery. Yeah, it is. It's just really different responses from humour to discomfort.
Totally. And then some very visceral responses of discomfort.
Yeah, like the tactile aspect to some people is super appealing, and to other people it's really absolutely not. They find it kind of a bit creepy.
How do you figure people's relationship to touching the objects?
Well, it's really interesting to observe people interacting or not interacting with the objects. The people watching aspect is part of the work. It can be very entertaining. Well, as a woman, it feels really different to kind of watch a cis man twiddling those nipple switches than it does to watch another woman do that. There's all of these areas where there's moments in those interactions that can reveal something about a power disparity and something about subject versus object. Yeah, it's intriguing to see people's comfort or discomfort levels and whether it brings out their really cheeky side or whether people tense up around the objects.
And you said as well, although obviously this is on a much more personal level, that there was a moment in the video that your mum finds particularly uncomfortable.
Yeah, so there's this moment in the video where where your perspective as a viewer feels like you're beneath me and I'm sort of straddling the camera in a way, which is your perspective, and the giant sort of strap-on recorder that I'm wearing at the time is dangling around above you, and it's parodying pornography. But for me, there's also a little reference there to this looking up at these grandiose, heroic male nude sculptures at the same time. Like you're down there and the work or the kind of phallus is up there above you. And I kind of find it funny to draw that parallel there.
Totally.
Yeah.
I guess your mum didn't find it so funny.
Not so much.
Yeah. So personal structures is not part of the official Biennale, and it also isn't a curated exhibition. Instead, as you said, artists are invited to present their work, but they also need to find their own funding to cover their participation, which is a point of controversy for some artists. So I wondered if you could talk about what it was like for you when you accepted the offer to show your work as part of personal structures. And I also wondered how you navigate those complexities of the exhibition, given that it's a really valuable opportunity for artists to present their work in Venice.
Well, straight off the bat, I knew that I would need support in the form of funding because, yes, it is really expensive to show in Venice. You know, I don't earn much in my teaching and I'm a solo mum. So, yeah, that was something that was definitely needed. So I immediately started putting together a funding proposal to Creative New Zealand, and I'm really, really grateful for their help and their support of my project, because without that, it simply wouldn't have been financially viable for me to show here in Venice. I have also spent a considerable amount of my own money, but with my financial means alone, there's no way that I would be here. Yeah, this opportunity to show internationally was, I didn't want to miss it. I love Venice, and it's just so full of people who love art. So that alone was really exciting to me. But it's also this opportunity to meet other artists and to create those international connections and have conversations with artists from around the globe. So that was another reason why I was really interested in coming here. Yeah, it's an honour to have this opportunity to be here as a New Zealand artist and a woman artist.
Yeah, this year is a stellar year for New Zealand artists at Venice. There's so many presenting, and it's so fantastic to be a part of that.
Absolutely, it's super exciting to see, artists like Mata Aho here in Venice. They're amazing, and it's actually lovely that there are. There's a nice bunch of New Zealand artists here, and so there's a range of New Zealand artist voices, and that more than one person has the opportunity to show their work. All of the artists who are showing in the Biennale, it's incredible, and their work is such an amazing high quality, and it's cool that they are all here. I think, I really like the fact that it's not just one person representing.
Yeah, definitely. To have that range that's really special.
Yeah.
And on that, what is it like to be in Venice during this busy week of the Biennale opening, when there are so many artists and there are so many curators, and it's this kind of frenetic, kind of busy time? And what are you hoping to achieve while you're here?
It's a bit of a crazy mixture of overwhelm and awe. The scale and virtuosity of the architecture and art here, and humorous kind of clash of high and low culture, from going from like St. Mark's Basilica to tourist carts selling T-shirts of Michelangelo's David doing a rude gesture. Yeah, it's pretty funny. And I guess one of the main things that I'm hoping to achieve while I'm here is to make connections with other artists and galleries and look at a whole lot of art and, yeah, just drink it all in, basically. And I'm looking forward to seeing the reactions to my work and kind of watching people interact with it.
Yeah. Will you be in the space much during the next week at a
Yeah,
bit?
I will visit. Like I think we'll come back a few times because I do find it really funny looking at people looking at my work. Because being in that space, there's a mirror for one thing, but also it's something that the objects do where you're looking at them, but you're also looking at yourself. So you're really aware of yourself and your body in the space with those body objects. And it's this kind of back and forth between the body objects and your own body. Which I find it really interesting to see how people react.
And you have a whole room to yourself as well, right?
Yes. I was really keen to basically create an installation with all of the objects together in a space. So that room that my work is in this building, it used to be, back in the day, it was the servants' bathroom, which I think is really funny in relationship to those body objects in that bathroom space. And it's also a really nice small scale, which means that you're forced to be up close and personal with the objects, and you feel them surrounding you. Yeah, so it's this strange experience.
And it's quite a narrow room as well. You really are up against...
Yeah, you're very close to the work.
The sculptures.
Yeah.
And then you see yourself in this mirror, which
Yeah.
is on one of the walls. It takes up most of the wall. So there's kind of nowhere to hide.
Yeah, there is nowhere to hide. And it's really only just over 1 metre wide, that room. When you turn away from the Canon kind of switch works on the wall and you see yourself in the mirror and you see them behind your head, like your head is nestled between them. So there's moments like that are pretty funny.
Yeah.
You've been listening to Crossing Currents, Aotearoa New Zealand Artists in Venice, an original podcast series by Contemporary Hum. Listen to Crossing Currents wherever you get your podcasts or visit contemporaryhum.com for each episode along with a transcript and images. Our thanks to Creative New Zealand for their support, Hamish Peterson for editing and mixing, Matariki Williams for cultural advisory, and Emma Kanyuk for design. Kia ora.